Welcome to this presentation on the Doctrine of Karma. I hope you'll find it helpful. The Doctrine of Karma is a complicated and confusing topic for many people. Sri Krishna himself admits its complexity in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita when he says in verse 17, Gahana karmano gatihi. Karmanaha gatihi, the ways of karma are gahana, very deep and mysterious. To make matters worse, no specific text or scripture can be found that provides a methodical explanation about the doctrine of karma. Instead, we have to depend on teachings scattered throughout the scriptures and piece all this together to form a comprehensive understanding. Fortunately, we can also make use of the oral tradition, which has transmitted a vast body of traditional wisdom from generation to generation through an unbroken lineage of teachers. In this series of presentations, we'll draw upon both of these resources to explain the doctrine of karma. In particular, we'll use teachings found in the Mahabharata, including the Bhagavad Gita, and we'll use teachings received from my guru, Puja Swāmī Tadātmānanda Saraswati. The doctrine of karma is based on the law of cause and effect. For every action, karma, there must be a corresponding effect, Phala. Phala literally means the fruit or result of an action. What appears to be a simple principle becomes surprisingly complicated when all the factors in a situation are considered. Let's begin with a simple example. On a billiard table, using a cue stick to strike a ball is a karma. And for that karma, there is a corresponding phala, the ball moves. But sometimes you can strike the ball and it'll move in a completely unexpected direction. How can this happen? In every situation, there are hidden variables. These hidden variables are unseen factors that can influence the outcome of an action. For example, if you strike the ball slightly off center, it won't go straight. Or if there's a fan blowing across the top of the table, the breeze could affect the ball's direction. Or if the table itself isn't level, the ball will be affected. These are examples of hidden variables. And since hidden variables are found in nearly every situation, the actions we do often yield unexpected results. This unpredictability is a fact of life. But the doctrine of karma attempts to explain that apparent unpredictability. Here's one of my guru's favorite examples. For every karma you do, there are actually 4 possible outcomes. You might get the result you expect, you might get less than you expect, you might get more than you expect, or you might get something completely different than you expect. To illustrate this, suppose you cross the street to catch the bus waiting on the other side. You might get the result you expect. That is, you cross the street and catch the bus. Or you might get less than you expect. As you're crossing the street, the bus drives away. Or you might get more than you expect. As you're crossing the street, a friend driving by sees you and offers you a ride. Finally, you might get something completely different than the result you expect. After you get halfway across the street, you might wake up 3 days later in a hospital bed after being hit by a car. For the same karma, there can be 4 different phalas. Why? Due to hidden variables, the unseen factors that can affect the outcome of an action. To explain unpredictable results like these, we often use the word luck. When you get a ride from a friend, you say, I was lucky. When you miss the bus, you say, I was unlucky. And if you wake up in a hospital bed, you say, I was extremely unlucky. But what does this word luck really mean? Is luck some kind of power or force that affects us somehow? That's not how the word is usually understood. We seem to use the expressions good luck and bad luck when we actually don't know the reason that something turns out better or worse than expected. The word luck is a euphemism, a substitute word that covers up the fact that we truly have no good explanation for these unpredictable results. From a scientific perspective, we could say that the outcome of certain actions have a degree of randomness associated with it. The mating of two cats of different colors will produce a litter of variously colored kittens. The selection of genes from mother and father appears to happen randomly. But the word random is a little bit like the word luck. It doesn't provide a precise explanation about a particular result. Also, what seems to be random might actually be due to the unseen effects of karma, as we'll discuss shortly. The rishis of ancient India refused to accept the unpredictability of results without a proper explanation. So, they developed what we know as the Doctrine of Karma. They based their teachings partly on scriptural revelation, partly on their own empirical observations about life, and partly on reasoning. The Doctrine of Karma they developed has the ability to clearly and comprehensively describe how and why our actions often have unexpected, unpredictable results. Their explanation begins with the assertion that for any action, karma, there are actually two kinds of results, phala. The first kind of result is Drishta Phala. Drishta means seen, so Drishta Phala is a result that is seen to be immediately produced by a karma, and that Drishta Phala is produced according to the natural laws known to science. When I drop this ball, my karma will produce a Drishta Phala, an immediate seen result. That is, the ball will fall according to the law of gravity. The second kind of result is Adrishta Phala. Adrishta means unseen. Adrishta Phala is a result that's not seen or experienced immediately after a karma is performed. It's a result that fructifies later in this life or in a future life, according to the laws of karma. So, Adrishta Phala is a result that is pending, so to speak. It is waiting to fructify. To illustrate this, suppose I drop this ball, but instead of falling, it remains suspended in the air, waiting to fall, like this. This trick shows the nature of Adrishta Phala. The act of dropping was performed, but the phala, the result, is pending, waiting to fructify. In reality, merely dropping a ball doesn't create any Adrishta Phala. It only creates normal Drishta Phala. According to the Doctrine of Karma, Adrishta Phala is only created by the performance of certain actions, our so-called good deeds and bad deeds, which are properly known as punya karmas and papa karmas. Punya karmas are pious dharmic actions, like prayer, rituals, acts of kindness, service to others, and so on. Papa karmas, on the other hand, are actions which are adharmic or harmful. The performance of punya karma produces punya, which is Adrishta Phala, that will eventually fructify to make the outcome of an action better than expected. Likewise, the performance of a papa karma produces papa, which is Adrishta Phala that will eventually fructify to make the outcome of an action worse than expected. This is a basic principle of the doctrine of karma. Our so-called good and bad deeds, our punya and papa karmas, will produce desirable and undesirable results for us when they fructify at some time in the future. To understand this better, here's an example. Suppose you're driving a blue car in heavy traffic, and you see a driver who wants to merge into your lane. You'd probably slow down briefly to let him in. This is an example of a punya karma, a good deed. And for this punya karma, you'll receive both Drishta Phala and Adrishta Phala. What kind of Drishta Phala will you receive? Since you had to slow down briefly, you'll arrive at home a few seconds later. And what kind of Adrishta Phala will you receive? There's no way of knowing exactly, but since you performed an act of kindness, you might be the recipient of someone else's act of kindness sometime in the future. Now, consider an impatient driver who deliberately speeds up to prevent the other car from merging. A discourteous act like this is a papa karma. The Drishta Phala of this discourteous act is that he reaches home a few seconds earlier. And the Adrishta Phala of his rude act might be that he becomes a recipient of someone else's rude behavior sometime in the future. There's no rule about when and where our Adrishta Phalas of past actions yield their results. They might fructify shortly after an act is committed, or at a much later date. Or those Adrishta Phalas might not fructify at all during this lifetime. And if they don't, they'll eventually yield their results in a future life. It's inevitable that some of the Adrishta Phala acquired in our past lives will fructify in the present life. This, according to the doctrine of karma, accounts for the hidden variables we discussed before. A punya karma performed in a past life, or earlier in this life, can fructify at any time, making things go better than we expect. A papa karma performed earlier can also fructify at any time, making things go worse than we expect. It is this fructification of Adrishta Phala that is the cause for the unexpected, unpredictable events of life. This Adrishta Phala is what we casually refer to as my karma. Like when you say, Mera karma bahut kharab hai. My karma is so bad. What we're actually referring to is not karma, strictly speaking, but rather the Adrishta Phala produced by past karmas. Now, let's consider one more important point. The entire doctrine of karma, as described so far, is based on the existence of Adrishta Phala. Since this Phala is Adrishta, unseen, it can't be scientifically studied. Science deals only with the observable universe, not with anything that can't be observed or measured, like Adrishta Phala. Therefore, it's impossible to scientifically prove the doctrine of karma. On the other hand, it's equally impossible to disprove the doctrine of karma using scientific methods. Why? Because Adrishta Phala is beyond the scope of science. So, If the doctrine of karma can neither be proved or disproved, then it falls into the category of belief. Anything that can't be proved or disproved, but we accept as being true, is a matter of faith. Belief differs from knowledge in this way. Now, it's important to note that the central teachings of Vedanta are meant to impart spiritual knowledge, not any kind of belief. In Vedanta, the nature of reality is to be known directly and personally. That reality is not a matter of faith. Yet, the teachings of Vedanta are part of a vast Hindu religious and cultural tradition, and that tradition happens to embrace the doctrine of karma. For this reason, the teachings of Vedanta have become intertwined, so to speak, with the doctrine of karma. But then we can ask, why should the doctrine of karma be taught or studied if we can't prove it to be true? Is it worth the effort? The answer, of course, is yes. What makes it worth teaching and studying doesn't depend on our ability to prove its correctness. What makes it valuable is its utility. The doctrine of karma can clearly and rationally explain unexpected events in our lives in a manner that helps us make sense of a world that sometimes seems bewildering and even threatening. Let's look at this more closely. From a scientific perspective, many events in life are said to be random. And to say that something is random means that it has no reason, it has no meaning or purpose. Suppose a baby is born with a birth defect caused by a particular genetic mutation. If the doctor explains that this birth defect is a random event, his explanation doesn't offer much comfort to the parents who are struggling and searching for some kind of reason for this tragic event. On the other hand, the doctrine of karma can explain the birth defect as being the result of Adrishta Phala from a past life. And Adrishta Phala such as this can fructify at any time or place according to the laws of karma. Even though this explanation doesn't address the difficulties the child and parents will face in life, it does help lessen the parents' frustration, bitterness, and resentment. It helps them accept more gracefully what cannot be changed. The doctrine of karma is especially useful in addressing the question, why do bad things happen to good people? There's an anecdote about this I'd like to share with you. Many years ago, I was invited to participate in an interfaith panel discussion. The panelists were all clergy members from different religions. There was a Roman Catholic nun, a rabbi, a Christian minister, and a Hindu Swāmī, me. The audience was comprised of cancer patients, some of whom were terminal, together with their families. One of the questions put to the panel was, why do bad things happen to good people? Each of the other panelists struggled with this question and offered answers that didn't seem very helpful. The Roman Catholic nun said that life is a divine mystery. We can never know the mind of God. But if that's really the case, then we simply don't know why good people get terminal cancer. The rabbi said that life is incredibly complicated, and therefore we don't really know what is a good thing and what is a bad thing. Sometimes good things turn out bad, and sometimes bad things turn out to be good. But it seems extremely unlikely that terminal cancer could ever turn out to be a good thing. The Christian ministers said that when we suffer, we are drawn closer to God. God sends us trials to test our devotion and to draw us nearer to Him. Unfortunately, this explanation makes God seem like a jealous spouse who uses emotional manipulation. I suspect that most audience members found little comfort in these answers. There was no Muslim imam on the panel, but if there were, I suppose he would have said that bad things happen to good people because of kismat or nasib, because of destiny or fate. But even this is not a very comforting answer for someone suffering from terminal cancer. All these Western religions seem to lack a helpful explanation for why bad things happen to good people. But the doctrine of karma clearly and simply says it is because of the fructification of Adrishta Phala from past lives. Even the most saintly person among us is born with at least a little papa from adharmic or harmful deeds committed in prior lives. Each and every one of us are born with both punya and papa from deeds we committed in past lives. Due to our papa, each of us will suffer in ways that we don't deserve based on our deeds in this life. Similarly, due to our punya, each of us will enjoy wonderful things that we don't deserve based on our deeds in this life. A teenage student of mine once complained that all this seems unfair. Why should we suffer or be rewarded in this life for deeds we committed in a prior life? The answer to his question is that fairness is guaranteed by the laws of karma because they apply equally to us all. Every one of us will receive undeserved suffering and undeserved enjoyment in this life due to our actions in past lives. Just as we are all equally subject to laws of nature, like the laws of gravity, we are also equally subject to the laws of karma. To bring this to a close, understanding the doctrine of karma helps us make sense of the unexpected, unpredictable events of our lives. When our carefully planned actions don't yield the results we expect, or when we are beset by some kind of tragedy, these teachings help us to be more patient, more composed, and more resilient. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Welcome. In our previous presentation on the doctrine of karma, we discussed how our actions sometimes produce unexpected, unpredictable results due to hidden variables, which are unseen factors that can influence the outcome of an action. These hidden variables are, in part, due to the fructification of Adrishta Phala. Adrishta Phala is a result that is unseen, Adrishta, at the time a karma is performed. So, Adrishta Phala is a result that is pending, waiting to fructify at some later time. And it is this Adrishta Phala that we refer to as my karma when we talk about the results of past actions that affect us in the present life. All this was discussed before and is summarized on the chart. In this presentation, our inquiry into the doctrine of karma will continue with an examination of how the outcome of every action is actually due to the combination of two main factors, Adrishta Phala and human effort. For guidance in this matter, we can turn to the third book of the Mahabharata, the Aranyaka Parva. There we find an elaborate depiction of the trials and tribulations undergone by the Pandavas during their 12 years of exile in the forest. In chapter 33, there's a remarkable dialogue between Yudhishthira and his wife Draupadi. Their discussion is focused on how a righteous crown prince like Yudhishthira could end up suffering the injustice of exile, with all the humiliation and misery that it entails. To Yudhishthira's surprise, Draupadi proclaims some exceedingly profound teachings about the doctrine of karma. To account for her amazing depth of knowledge, she explains that when she was a little girl, her father, Drupada, had invited a wise Brahmana to live with them. This Brahmana had been blessed with great wisdom by none other than Brahaspati, the deity who served as priest and guru to the gods in heaven. The Brahmana imparted this great wisdom to Drupada, including teachings about the doctrine of karma. At those times, Draupadi sat in her father's lap, absorbing everything the Brahmana taught. In verse 30, Draupadi gives 3 different ways of explaining how everyone is subject to undergo undeserved suffering in life, even a righteous person like Yudhishthira. First, she says, Sarvam eva hatenaike. Eke, some people say that sarvam, everything that happens in life is hatena, is due to hata, chance, occurring entirely at random. Secondly, she says, Dishte vadantyuta. Breaking the words apart, eke vadanti, other people say, everything that happens in life is dishta, ordained or determined by the Adrishta Phalas that fructify in this life. Thirdly, she says, Purusha prayatnajam kechata. Kechata, other people say that everything that happens in life is due to Purusha prayatna, the effort, prayatna, of a person, Purusha. Then she concludes, Kraidham etan niruchyate. Etat, this topic, about everything that happens in life, niruchyate, is explained, Kraidham, in 3 different ways, as being due to chance, due to Adrishta Phala, or due to Purusha Prayatna, human effort. Now, we need to expand on Draupadi's observation here. Let's start with the third line. Many people profess that our lives are shaped exclusively by the decisions we make and the efforts we exert. They say we are all born with free will, so each of us is the captain of his own ship, so to speak. We are free to choose any course we want as we navigate the river of life. This sounds good, but such people fail to acknowledge the hidden variables that can and do affect us while we're sailing down the river of life. In a sailboat, you can control your direction with the rudder, but you can't control the wind. If the wind blows in the wrong direction, your progress will be stalled. And if the wind stops altogether, your sailboat won't move an inch. Using our free will, we can choose to act, but we can't choose the outcome of that action. Sri Krishna says this very clearly in the most frequently quoted verse in the Bhagavad Gita. Karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. Te adhikaraha. You have authority, command, or choice, karmani eva, over your actions alone. Ma phaleshu. But you have no command or choice over the results of those actions, kadachana, at any time. Simply put, we can choose our actions, but we can't choose the results, because the results are partly determined by our Adrishta Phala, as we discussed before. In the first line, Draupadi describes the view of others who are less optimistic. They believe that the hidden variables which affect us in life are basically random. When the outcome of an action is better or worse than expected, according to them, it's not due to the fructification of a Drishta Phala, it's merely a matter of chance. So, there's a 50-50 chance of an outcome being better or worse than expected. No doubt, randomness is a fact of nature. The smoke from an incense stick will spread out in the room even if the air is perfectly still. The random motion of air molecules is responsible for this phenomenon. Yet, there's no basis for saying that all hidden variables are random. What looks random might indeed be due to the fructification of Adrishta Phala. A scientist will say that your genes are selected at random, some from your mother's DNA and some from your father's. But it's also possible that your genes have been determined by your Adrishta Phala according to the laws of karma. We noted before that scientists can't investigate Adrishta Phala because it's unobservable. So, they can't dismiss the possibility that your genome has been determined according to the laws of karma. For this reason, it's not true that all hidden variables are random. Some may be random, but some may be due to your past karma. In the second line, Draupadi describes the view of those who misinterpret the doctrine of karma. They correctly say that the hidden variables in life are Drishta, ordained or determined by our Adrishta Phala from deeds committed before. But they make a mistake by claiming that everything that happens in life is determined exclusively by our Adrishta Phala and not by anything else. This view totally negates the role of human effort in producing results. And it also negates the possibility of any randomness in the universe. They go too far in claiming that Adrishta Phala is the sole factor in determining the outcome of our actions. Yet, some people cling to this misconception. And this misconception is particularly harmful because if the outcome of every action you perform is determined by your Adrishta Phala alone, then your efforts really don't make any difference. And if your efforts don't make any difference, then why should you bother making an effort at all? This unfortunate misconception can lead people to be resigned, submissive, and fatalistic. All three of the views described by Draupadi claim that one factor and one factor alone is responsible for the outcome of an action. But the truth is, all three of the factors are jointly responsible for what happens. And that's exactly what Draupadi explains in the next verse. Starting with the third line, Purusha Phalam Apnoti. Purusha, a person, Apnoti, obtains, Phalam, the results of an action, Kinchit Daivat, partly due to Daiva, which refers to Adrishta Phala, Datat Kinchit, and partly due to Hatha, chance, Kinchireva Swakarmataha, and partly Swakarmataha due to one's efforts. Chaturtam Natra Karanam. Naatra, there is no, Chaturtam, fourth, Karanam, cause or factor. It's the combination of all three factors, chance, Adrishta Phala, and human effort, that determines result of a particular action. This is a central teaching of the doctrine of karma, and is very clearly described here by Draupadi. Now we can turn to a traditional metaphor that vividly demonstrates how these factors affect us in our lives. Suppose you were to swim across a river. You start out swimming directly towards your destination on the far bank, but the current sweeps you a bit downstream from that spot. In this metaphor, swimming represents the human effort you exert in the performance of any karma, and the river's current represents the effects of your Adrishta Phala. You can think of it as a karmic current, since it represents the force of your past karmas. The randomness described before is not a major factor in this particular metaphor. Even though the water molecules are moving randomly, it really doesn't make any difference here, so we'll set this factor aside for now. The purpose of this metaphor is to show that the outcome of your actions depends jointly on these two main factors, human effort and past karma. The importance of either factor cannot be discounted. This metaphor is also useful in answering several common questions about the doctrine of karma. First of all, can the force of our past karmas make it impossible for us to reach our goals? Not necessarily, as this metaphor shows. Does the river's current make it impossible for you to reach your goal on the far bank? There are several ways to reach that spot. You could swim across a river and then walk up the other side, or you could walk up the near side of the river and then swim across. Or, if you're really smart, you could swim across a river at the exact angle that compensates for the force of the current. These examples nicely demonstrate how we can accommodate or compensate for the effects of past karmas in our lives. We often do this instinctively, without even thinking about karma. When you're driving and traffic on the road is too heavy, you take another route. When you want a raise in salary at work, but your supervisor refuses, you get yourself transferred to another department. When obstacles in life arise due to the fructification of past karmas, we often instinctively respond by taking the necessary steps to either remove the obstacles or to find a way to go around them. There's another aspect of the laws of karma nicely demonstrated by this metaphor. The strength or intensity of the effects of our past karmas can vary considerably. Sometimes the force of the karmic current in life can be extremely strong, perhaps due to the fructification of Adrishta Phala arising from some extremely powerful past actions. But sometimes the force exerted by our past karmas can be quite weak. In the case of the river, if the current is fairly weak, and if you're a strong swimmer, it won't affect you much. You could even swim directly upstream. In the same way, if the force exerted by the fructification of your past karma is fairly weak, and if you exert sufficient effort, you can overcome any and all obstacles created by your past karma. On the other hand, there are times in life when the force exerted by the fructification of our past karmas is exceedingly strong. At such times, we need to employ suitable strategies to meet those challenges. Suppose the river we've been talking about lies in India, and you arrive at its banks during the monsoon season, when heavy rains have caused the river to swell, turning it into a violent torrent of rushing water. If you were to try to swim across the river, you would certainly drown. This scenario represents the times in life when the force of our past karmas is overwhelming. No matter how hard we might try, we will not be able to overcome the unyielding force of such powerful karmic currents. But in such situations, failure or disaster is not inevitable. Even though we have no choice or control over the powerful Adrishta Phalas that are fructifying, we always have choice over our actions. This is a crucially important principle. No matter what kind of obstacles our past karmas might produce, we can always choose how we respond in any situation. We're never truly helpless. To illustrate this, if the river is a raging torrent, only a fool would jump in. A wise person would wait for the monsoon season to end and for the river to return to its normal, placid state. Then he or she could easily swim across. In the same way, when insurmountable obstacles are created by our past karmas, the best response might simply be to wait. When heavy traffic grinds to a halt, or when the boss says no to your request for a raise, patience is required. Before long, the traffic will start moving again. And you might find that your supervisor eventually changes his mind about your raise if you continue to work hard and with a good attitude in spite of his refusal. Also, there's another intelligent way to respond to the obstacle presented by the swollen river. You could choose a different destination, on this side of the river instead of the spot on the far bank. This example points to the fact that there are many important goals in life worthy of being sought. When we meet with insurmountable obstacles created by our past karmas, sometimes we need to re-evaluate our goals. If we're flexible enough to make the necessary adjustments, we can continue to move forward in life by shifting the direction of our efforts towards a new objective. If the traffic is so bad, maybe you don't really need to go to Starbucks for that coffee. And when your supervisor says no to your request for a raise, you could certainly look for another job. As they say, when one door closes, another opens. Based on all this, we are never, ever helpless in the face of our past karmas. To assume that you are helpless is an utterly self-defeating mistake. To understand this, suppose a foolish person accidentally falls into the river and realizes a powerful current is sweeping him downstream. If he feels helpless, he might panic and wildly thrash about in the water. While he's doing so, he'll continue to be swept downstream towards the rocks and waterfall. This example demonstrates what can happen when we suddenly find ourselves thrust into situations that are frightening and threatening, situations born of our past papa karmas, situations for which we are totally unprepared. Suppose your car accidentally veers off the road and ends up in a ditch. If you become frozen by panic and fear, how will you get out of the ditch? In other situations, instead of panic and fear, your mind might be flooded by anger and resentment, like if a careless driver were to crash into your car. If you respond by shouting a non-stop flow of verbal abuse, your impulsive and foolish behavior will only succeed in making a bad situation even worse. When our past karmas give rise to frightening or threatening situations, what can we do to respond more effectively? To answer that question, consider what an intelligent person would do after accidentally falling into the river. She might allow herself to float downstream for a few moments to calm herself and to determine the strength and direction of the current. Then, armed with this knowledge, she can figure out how to safely swim back to the near bank. Based on this example, if your car ends up in a ditch or struck by another car, an intelligent response might be to wait a few moments before doing anything, to calm yourself and allow the adrenaline rush to fade away. Those few moments can not only help settle your emotions, but they can also give you an opportunity to better understand the karmic current into which you've been swept. Then, with a composed mind and thoughtful deliberation, you can respond more appropriately and effectively to the situation. In times of crisis, they say, don't just sit there, do something. But based on these observations, it might be better to take the opposite approach. Don't just do something, sit there. That means don't just act impulsively. Take some time to compose yourself and to think clearly before you act. Of course, in stressful situations, many people find it difficult to avoid panic, fear, anger, and impulsive behavior. In the heat of the moment, when your past karma fructifies by thrusting you into a new crisis, the way you respond depends largely on your state of mind. Some people's minds are naturally more composed and resilient, whereas others are more easily thrown off balance. For those who are subject to being thrown off balance in this way, regular prayer and meditation can bring about a tremendous decrease in the mind's reactivity and instability. Over the years, I've witnessed this transformation in myself and in many other spiritual practitioners. Regular prayer and meditation definitely helps develop an inner poise or calmness that persists even in stressful situations. Your own ongoing practice can help you remain steadfast at that so-called still point at the center of the storm, each time you encounter the challenges that arise due to the fructification of papa karma. Then, blessed by the fruits of your spiritual practice, you can more calmly and confidently navigate your way along the river of life. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhaveta Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Welcome. In our two previous presentations on a doctrine of karma, we discussed the nature of Adrishta Phala, which describes the result of past actions that can fructify long after the karma was performed. In this presentation, we'll expand our perspective to examine the doctrine of karma as it pertains not only to the present life, but to our past and future lives as well. We can begin by noting a basic principle of the doctrine of karma. That is, you were born because of your past karma. To understand this clearly, consider the circumstances immediately preceding your birth. At that time, many of the karmas you performed in past lives had not yet yielded all their results. A great deal of Adrishta Phala was waiting to fructify. And since you committed those actions, you must eventually reap the results. But unless you're alive, it's impossible for all that Phala to fructify. Therefore, to enable your past actions to yield their results, the laws of karma act to bring about your birth. Now you might ask, how much Adrishta Phala do you have that's still waiting to fructify? Well, that depends on how many lives you've had before. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna tells Arjuna in chapter 4, Bahuni me vyatitani janmani tava charjuna. O Arjuna, me, for me, tavacha, and for you, there have been bahuni, many, vyatitani, past, janmani, lives. Exactly how many lives? According to the ancient rishis, we live in a cyclic universe. This universe was preceded by another, which was preceded by yet another, and so on. Like a circle has no beginning or end, this cycle of creation and dissolution also has no beginning or end. So, there was no first cycle of creation. Instead, an infinite number of universes have come and gone before. And, in an infinite number of prior universes, how many times were you born? According to the doctrine of karma, you've had an infinite number of prior births. Just as the universe had no first cycle of creation, so too you had no first birth. Why? Birth is due to past karma, but for your very first birth, how could there be any past karma? It's impossible. Therefore, you must have had an infinite number of prior lives. And in an infinite number of prior lives, you've certainly committed an infinite number of karmas. Each and every one of those karmas produced Adrishta Phala. As a result, over all your past lives, you've accumulated an infinite amount of Adrishta Phala, which is now waiting to fructify. The good news is that you've accumulated an infinite amount of punya, which will bring happiness to you in this and in future lives. The bad news is that you've also accumulated an infinite amount of papa, which will bring suffering to you in this and future lives. Now, we seem to have a problem. If you've accumulated an infinite amount of punya and papa in your past lives, how long would it take for all that karma to fructify? You'd need an infinitely long life to reap all those results. But this life is finite, and in a finite life, only a finite amount of Adrishta Phala can possibly fructify. That means only a portion of your infinite accumulation of punya and papa will be able to fructify in this life. To explain all this, the doctrine of karma distinguishes 3 different kinds of karmas waiting to fructify. The first is Sanchita karma, which is the infinite accumulation of punya and papa we've been talking about. Sanchita literally means collected or accumulated. The second kind is Prabadha karma, which is the finite portion of your Sanchita karma that will fructify in this lifetime. Prabadha literally means that which has begun. It describes the Adrishta Phala that's responsible for the beginning of this life. There's also a third kind of karma, which we'll discuss a bit later. As we saw before, the laws of karma brought about your birth so that your past karmas could fructify. Specifically, it's your prarabdha karma that will fructify in this life. The punya and papa that makes up your prarabdha karma will gradually yield their fruits throughout this life. The fructification of punya will bring unexpected good things to your life, while the fructification of papa will bring unexpected problems to your life. And when all your prarabdha karmas have finally fructified, your life will come to an end. In this way, prarabdha karma determines the span of your life. Let me try to illustrate this. Suppose the sweet, juicy red apple represents punya, which is Adrishta Phala from a good deed you performed in a past life. The green apple, which is extremely sour and unpleasant, represents papa, which is Adrishta Phala from an adharmic deed you performed before. In an infinite number of prior lives, you've accumulated an infinite amount of Adrishta Phala, and this is your Sanchita karma. From your Sanchita karma, a finite amount of prarabdha karma comes forth and produces your birth. That prarabdha karma will gradually fructify, bringing unexpected happiness and suffering to your life. And when that prarabdha is exhausted, your life comes to an end. Then a new batch of prarabdha will come forth and bring about another life. Then, when that gets exhausted, yet another birth will take place, and so on. Some people are born with enough prarabdha karma to require 90 years or more for it to fructify. Others are born with less prarabdha karma, resulting in correspondingly shorter lifetimes. Infant mortality can be explained in this way. Now, let's consider the particular punya and papa that makes up your prarabdha karma. More punya will bring more happiness to your life, while more papa will bring more suffering. You could think of the punya and papa as forming a ratio. If the ratio is more or less equal, your prarabdha karma will produce a similar measure of happiness and suffering in your life. But suppose you were born with punya alone and no papa whatsoever. The fructification of that prarabdha would create an extraordinarily wonderful life, entirely free from suffering. But it's impossible to enjoy such a life as a human being on this planet. After all, even billionaires and movie stars get headaches. Prarabdha karma that consists of punya alone is said to bring about a life in Swarga, heaven. Swarga is not necessarily a particular place. More accurately, it describes a lifetime of sheer enjoyment, untainted by suffering, a lifetime that's a product of pure punya. On the other hand, suppose your prarabdha karma consisted only of papa and no punya whatsoever. The fructification of that prarabdha would result in a life of intense, uninterrupted suffering. Once again, that kind of life isn't possible as a human being on this planet. Even in miserable slums and horrible war zones, laughter can still be heard from time to time. Therefore, prarabdha karma that consists in papa alone is said to bring about a life in naraka, hell. Like Swarga, naraka too is not necessarily a particular place. Rather, it describes a lifetime of suffering, unmitigated by any kind of enjoyment. Such a lifetime is a product of pure papa. We previously discussed how your life comes to an end when all your prarabdha karma has fructified. That means, if you get born in either Swarga or Naraka, your existence there is limited to one finite lifetime. That makes sense because Swarga and Naraka are not the result of your infinite Sanchita karma. They're the result of your finite prarabdha karma. Sri Krishna himself teaches this in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where he says in verse 21, Te tam bhuktva swargalokam vishalam kshine punye martya lokam vishanti. Te bhuktva, after they have enjoyed, tam vishalam swargalokam, that vast heavenly domain, kshine punye, when their punya has completely fructified, martya lokam vishanti, they return to the human domain. In the same way, those born in naraka loka, hell, will also return when all their papa has fructified. Western religions generally profess that we have a single life which is followed by eternal heaven or hell. However, from our perspective, this concept doesn't stand up very well to logical scrutiny. An eternity in heaven would require an infinite number of good deeds, and an eternity in hell would require an infinite number of bad deeds. When I was a young child growing up in a Christian family, I was taught that if I committed a sin and then died shortly thereafter, I would suffer in hell for all eternity. What can a 7-year-old boy possibly do that's so dreadful as to deserve an eternity of punishment? The doctrine of karma, on the other hand, teaches that Swarga is the finite result of your finite punya karmas, and Naraka is the finite result of your finite papa karmas. Going to heaven, then, is like going on a holiday. You leave your home with a fixed amount of money to pay for your vacation in Hawaii or wherever, and when all your money is spent, you have to return home. In the same way, when all your punya is exhausted, your enjoyment of heaven necessarily comes to an end. Then again, going to hell is like going to prison. For your crime, you receive a sentence of an appropriate length, and after suffering in jail for that allotted time, you're finally released from confinement. In the same way, when your papa is exhausted, your suffering in Naraka inevitably comes to an end. Life as a human being on this planet is considered to be the result of a mixture of punya and papa. For most people, that mixture is presumed to be about 50-50, resulting in an equal measure of happiness and suffering in this life. But that ratio is subject to being changed, leading to either more happiness or more suffering in this life. And this brings us to the third kind of karma. In addition to Sanchita karma and Prarabdha karma, there's a third kind called Kriyamana karma. It can also be referred to as Agami karma. Kriyamana means that which is being done now, at the present time. It refers to the so-called good and bad deeds you perform in this life. These deeds are better known as Punya karma and Papa karma. When you commit Papa karmas, some of the Adrishta Phala produced will add to your Sanchita karma and eventually cause suffering in future lives. But some of that Adrishta Phala will add to your Prarabdha karma instead and cause suffering in this life itself, as the illustration shows. When that Prarabdha karma fructifies in this life, it changes the ratio of Punya and Papa, bringing more suffering to this life. That means no matter how bad your life is now, you can make it even worse by committing more Papa karmas. Fortunately, you can also make your life better by performing more Punya karmas. Some of the Adrishta Phala they produce will add to your Sanchita karma and eventually bring happiness to future lives. But some of that Adrishta Phala will add to your Prarabdha instead and fructify in this life itself, bringing more happiness to this life. This is all somewhat complicated, so I'd like to share with you a diagram that clearly and concisely summarizes everything we've discussed so far. Your Sanchita karma is an infinite accumulation of Punya and Papa. From that Sanchita karma, the portion known as Prarabdha karma is responsible for bringing about a given birth. If that Prarabdha karma is Punya alone, a lifetime in heaven will result. And if that Prarabdha karma is Papa alone, a lifetime in hell will result. Similar amounts of Punya and Papa give rise to a human birth. Actions you do in this life result in Kriyamana karma. Some of this will add to your Sanchita karma and fructify in future lives. And some will add to your Prarabdha karma and fructify in this life itself. This changes the balance of Punya and Papa, resulting in more happiness or more suffering in your present life. After all your Prarabdha karmas have fructified, this life comes to an end. Then a new batch of Prarabdha karmas give rise to your next birth. And when these Prarabdha karmas are exhausted, you are born again, and so on. Now, there's one final question to consider. Do the actions you perform in this life directly affect what happens in your next life? This turns out to be a difficult question. When you die, any Adrishta Phala that has not yet fructified will merge with your infinite Sanchita karma. As a result of this, the actions performed in this life will affect your next life only indirectly by way of your Sanchita karma. But because the karmas you will have done in this life are so minute in comparison to your infinite Sanchita, few, if any, of those karmas are likely to be included in the next batch of Prarabdha, which will fructify in your next life. However, there are exceptions to this general principle. In chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says in verse 43, Tatra tam buddhi samyogam labate paurva dehikam yatate chatato bhuyaha samsiddhau kuru nandana. Tatra, there, in the next life, labhate, he gains, buddhi samyogam, the wisdom he was endowed with, paurva dehikam, in his prior life. Tatahacha, and thereafter, yatate bhuyaha, he will again strive, samsiddhau, for perfection, kurunandana, O Arjuna. Here, Sri Krishna describes what happens to those who exert tremendous effort to gain moksha, liberation, but unfortunately fail to live long enough to reach that lofty goal. According to Sri Krishna, such people will pick up the thread, so to speak, in their very next life, continuing their spiritual journey where they left off. But the doctrine of karma, as explained so far, can't account for this sequence of events. There must be an additional factor involved here. And that additional factor is called purva janma samskara. A samskara, a deep impression formed in the purva janma, prior life. The performance of extremely intense actions is said to leave a deep impression, a samskara, on the sukshma sharira, the subtle body. At death, the sukshma sharira, subtle body, together with this samskara, leaves one physical body and acquires a new one. Even though the nature of the new body is determined by prarabdha karma, the sukshma sharira that dwells within it can possess a samskara, a predisposition from the immediately preceding life. Some people believe this explains the phenomenon of child prodigies, like Mozart, who traveled around Europe giving stunning piano concerts at the age of 7. This also explains how a powerful inclination towards spiritual growth can persist from one life to the next. Now, before we conclude, it's really important to say that the doctrine of karma is not so precise and mathematical as this presentation might make it seem. Even though our discussion has been firmly based both on scripture and on teachings from the oral tradition, it is not at all possible to predict or calculate what will happen at any point in time due to the fructification of Adrishta Phala. As we saw before, Adrishta Phala can't be observed or scientifically studied, so the specific nature of Adrishta Phala is ultimately unknowable. Fortunately, the general nature of Adrishta Phala can be understood, and this general understanding can help us explain why bad things happen to good people. It can help us cope better when tragedy raises its fearful head, and it can help us more gracefully accept situations in life that are beyond our control. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhaveta, Asato Ma Satgamaya, Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. A question I've been asked more frequently than any other is, why do bad things happen to good people? People who are kind, responsible, virtuous, and even saintly. Such people can be stricken by cancer or lose their investments in the stock market. They can be cheated by scam artists or mugged by dangerous drug addicts. And not only do bad things happen to good people, but also good things happen to bad people. Dishonest business owners earn enormous profits by fleecing others. Powerful drug lords with huge cartels in Mexico and Colombia enjoy spectacular houses, private jets, and costly jewelry, all without fear of ever being arrested. Why does God allow all of this? Such questions are challenging for religious and spiritual teachers, who sometimes struggle for answers. Some of the explanations they offer don't seem particularly helpful. I learned this long ago when I was invited to participate in a panel discussion conducted by Cancer Care, which is an organization that provides counseling services to cancer patients and their families. The panel included a Christian minister, a Roman Catholic nun, a rabbi, and a Hindu monk, me. Our audience consisted of cancer patients and their families, all of whom found themselves confronting a life-threatening disease. Each panelist was asked to give a 10-minute opening statement. The minister said, "We are all sinful by nature, no matter how pious we might be, and therefore we're all subject to being punished for our sins." The rabbi said, "God introduces trials and tribulations into our lives to test our faith and strengthen our devotion." The nun said, "The suffering God gives us is a mystery that we can never fully understand. After all, who can comprehend the mind of God?" As I listened to them, each of their explanations seemed to have some serious shortcomings. For example, if God is punishing us for our sins, then what sin was committed by a 5-year-old child that deserves to be punished with a malignant brain tumor? Further, saying that God is testing our faith to strengthen our devotion, unfortunately, makes God sound like a jealous lover using emotional manipulation to increase our love for him. And to suggest that suffering from cancer is an incomprehensible mystery simply avoids answering the question altogether. When it was my turn to speak, I faced a dilemma. The explanations offered by the other panelists were all based on the Bible, and were therefore familiar to the attendees, who were mostly of Christian and Jewish backgrounds. But the only explanation I could offer was based on the Doctrine of Karma, a Hindu teaching that would most likely be foreign to most of the audience. With this in mind, I tried to explain the Doctrine of Karma as simply and clearly as I could. I said, Hindus believe that the universe is cyclic. It has undergone countless cycles of creation and destruction prior to the birth of our current universe. And in each cycle of creation, we've all been born again and again. In those prior lives, we've all committed many good deeds and many deeds that were harmful or morally wrong in one way or another. According to the Doctrine of Karma, we receive the fruits or results of the deeds we committed, not only in this life, but in our past lives as well. We receive desirable results for our good deeds and undesirable results for our wrong deeds. Most of those results take place soon after each deed is committed, but some results might not have arisen before we die. In that case, those so-called unfructified results are carried over into our next life. And that's what's known as karma. So, all of us are born with both good and bad karmas from our prior lives. The good karmas we're born with guarantee that we'll enjoy wonderful things in this life, things that we don't deserve based on our deeds in this lifetime. It's certainly true that we've all been blessed with many wonderful experiences that we haven't worked for and don't really deserve. Those are the result of good karma. On the other hand, the bad karmas we're born with guarantee that we'll undergo suffering in this life, suffering that we really don't deserve based on our deeds in this lifetime. And here is the answer we're looking for. Every good person was born with some bad karma, and that bad karma results in undeserved suffering. Similarly, every bad person was born with some good karma, and that good karma results in good things they don't deserve. When the attendees were invited to ask questions, a woman, wearing a scarf over her hairless head, said that it didn't seem fair to be punished in this life for wrong deeds we committed in past lives, deeds that we don't even remember. I agreed that it would indeed be unfair if she alone was punished for wrong deeds committed in past lives. But karma affects us all. Consider this. Being legally required to pay income tax each year would be unfair if you alone were taxed. But we're all subject to taxation, and that universality makes taxes fair. In the same way, we are all subject to suffering the consequences of wrong deeds committed in prior lives, even if we don't remember them. And that universality makes karma fair. Her question led to another discussion about being punished by God. Many say that God judges our behavior and then rewards us for our good deeds and punishes us for our wrong deeds. But this is a distinctly biblical perspective. From the Hindu point of view, God doesn't judge our behavior. Instead, God simply gives us the results of our deeds, results that we ourselves have earned. For instance, the paycheck you receive after working each week isn't a reward. You earned it. And while shopping in a store, if you accidentally break some merchandise, having to pay for it isn't a punishment. You are responsible for its cost. In the same way, God gives us desirable results we ourselves have earned by our good deeds. And God gives us undesirable results we ourselves have earned by our wrong deeds. So, according to the doctrine of karma, God doesn't reward us or punish us. Based on this, cancer cannot be considered a form of punishment. Instead, it's usually the tragic consequence of wrong deeds we committed in prior lives, except when smoking cigarettes or other unhealthy behaviors caused that cancer. I concluded by saying, each and every one of us was born with at least some bad karma from our past lives. And as a result, each and every one of us is subject to suffering that we really don't deserve based on our deeds in the present life. This principle applies to us all, even the most saintly among us. And if this principle is fully understood, then instead of asking, why me? Why was I diagnosed with cancer? We could say instead, why not me? Am I so special that I should somehow be excluded from undeserved suffering, even though everyone else is subject to it? After the panel discussion concluded, several attendees thanked me for my comments. But those comments might not have been too helpful for many in the audience. Why not? Each of us understands the world according to our own individual beliefs. Some believe that God punishes us for our sins. Others believe that we reap the consequences of deeds we committed in past lives. Most of us acquired our individual beliefs as children. We learned or assimilated them from our parents, teachers, and other authority figures. In this way, biblical beliefs have been deeply rooted in the minds of most Americans. And as a result, they're likely to reject other beliefs, like the Doctrine of Karma, even if those beliefs seem helpful. Strictly speaking, we can never say that one belief is true and others are false. By definition, beliefs pertain only to matters that can't be conclusively proved or disproved, matters that can't be established as being true or false. If something can be proven to be true, then it's not a belief. It's knowledge, like 2 + 2 = 4. Properly understood, beliefs lie outside the scope of knowledge. Philosophers say beliefs are non-verifiable. But even though we can't appraise the truth or falsity of a particular belief, we can say that some beliefs are more helpful than others. The belief that cancer is God's way of punishing us for our sins is not helpful at all. In fact, this belief can inflict guilt and shame on someone who's already struggling to cope with a life-threatening illness. This belief can also make people angry at God and even lead them to lose their faith altogether. On the other hand, it seems much more beneficial to believe that cancer is a tragic consequence of being born with bad karma. This belief can help people accept their diagnosis more gracefully and respond to their illness with a much healthier attitude, as I have witnessed in the lives of many.